I don't have time to redo and reset. Okay. If you can see me over there, you're good. If you can't, you can't.
I don't know, because that one stopped.
I just started. I'm going to sit here and just wait for a minute. Okay, I am definitely live, and I have two people watching, and I just don't see my own reflection. So I don't need to look at myself, right? Good. If you have any difficulties watching and seeing and hearing, just write me a one-word comment, and I will do something. I don't know what, but okay, looks good. 4 people, great. Good morning, everyone. Sorry for the late start and technical glitches and whatever's going on. Good. Hannah says I'm watching. Good. I see and hear every word. Thank you, Batya Meira. Thank you. Good. So I'm just going to go on without seeing myself. I know what I look like, right? You should have in front of you a book of Daniel, chapter 4. We're going to be reading chapter 4. And you should also have the source sheet. My source sheet is, the 5-6 page length, and tells you what we're going to be focusing on and all that sort of stuff, and the list of chapter headings. I'm trying to make sure that we get at the end of all of this a good, clear set of pictures of events that happen in the book, and especially the visions of the king we're worried about here. Later on, it's going to be the visions that Daniel gets, because that's going to be our end of days stuff. Okay? I rejiggered the chart of the elements of the dream in chapter 2. That's going to be an important one, because that comes up in these chapters towards the beginning, and it's also going to come up towards the end as well. So we need to sort of keep this in mind. We're up to 6 kingdoms now. The thought has always been that there are 4 kingdoms, but there are in fact 6. We'll be talking about this. If you don't have a copy of the book of Daniel in front of you, go to about page 3 of my handout and my source sheets, and you'll see, click on this link, you'll get to Daniel chapter 4 with Rashi's commentary in English. That is, of course, on Chabad.org. Okay? Keep in mind chapter 2, right? You've been following this for a while, and chapter 2 talked about the statue, the king's empire and the subsequent empires that would follow him. That was the statue in the king's dream. That's chapter 2. Chapter 3, of course, was the statue that the king made out of gold to try and magically, mystically undo the downfall of his kingdom that was inevitable, that was meant to happen, through magical, mystical means. Here in chapter 4, we're going to see the tree. And the tree seems to be referring to the king himself, his insanity and his subsequent cure. So it's a very personal lesson. It is an epistle to the nations. Isn't that a good word? Epistle. It is a letter that King Nebuchadnezzar writes to all the people of his kingdom, and I'm guessing it was meant to be read aloud in the town square. He tells the dream, and then he tells the interpretation, and then he tells very clearly what happened to him. The focus that I want to propose and push today is, yes, we're going to talk about the dream, we're going to talk about what happens to the king, but we're going to talk about the unity and the continuity that really does exist in the book of Daniel. We're going to be looking at Abarbanel, Rav Yitzchak Abarbanel, and he lived in the 15th century, died in 1508. I included that in the handouts and the source sheets. It's an old edition, but it's readable. If you would like to get together and read Abarbanel, he turns out to be a lot easier than he appears on the surface in terms of reading and understanding. The good news is Malbim is the one who explains and summarizes it for us. The Maharal is different from the Malbim. Malbim is 19th century, died in 1879, with Mayor Leibish Visser. And he's got the major points of Abarbanel summarized. The commentaries within the classical Jewish world of commentaries, as well as the so-called scholarly commentaries, all take this as being a very, very disparate book, I think is the correct word. Sources, texts, stories that have been put together, but originally did not belong together. Malbim and Abarbanel are going to say the exact opposite, and they're talking into what I'm going to loosely describe as a very naive reading. Right, the word naive, we tend to use it in a sort of negative manner, but here we're Jews. We are traditional Jews. We're spiritually seeking people, and we're looking at a book of the Torah, a book that was included in the Holy Bible, any sort of terminology that you want to use for this, scripture. And there is, of necessity, some sort of unity to this book. And there is a trajectory. It goes from chapter 1 through chapter 2, 3, 4, and this is what these two commentaries are bringing out here, and this is what we're going to be getting at. We've got to use a couple of fancy words here. And there are people who like to look at the illnesses in the Bible, especially the apparent psychiatric illnesses. And we're just going to go through a couple of the words here so you know what they are. And number one is monomania. I mean, this is all very straightforward Wikipedia research that I got a little bit too much into over the last couple of days. Monomania is an exaggerated or exceptionally obsessive enthusiasm for something. You get totally focused on something. It's really from 19th century psychiatry and psychoanalysis. The word that we're going to be looking at and that is going to come up in discussions of all of this is zoanthropy, where you believe you're an animal and you go and live like one. Specifically, and there is a word for Nebuchadnezzar here, it's called boanthropy. The sufferer believes that he or she is an ox or cow. The classic example being King Nebuchadnezzar. Carl Jung has something to say about this. Freud has a little bit to say about it. And also the interesting thing that comes up in Freud is the notion of a delusion beginning in a dream and persisting and growing after you wake up from the dream. I never studied psychiatry or psychology. Little bit here and there in my graduate school days, but what we are concerned about and what we're going to look at, I think, mostly is going to be Malbim's reading of what happens with the king. He has a clear set of stages where he descends into a place where his mind is completely taken away from him. And then his mind returns and he realizes he's living like an animal. Then he starts to stand up and he returns to being a man, and then he returns to being the king. Obviously, the turning point is recognition of God as creator and in charge of absolutely everything. You're going to see names of God here. And the ones we are dealing with are, of course, the name Marduk, who is the god of Babylon, the main god, and his title is Bel. This comes up in the names Belshazzar that is given to Daniel, and he's going to be called and addressed by Nebuchadnezzar as Belshazzar, the wise one given wisdom by Bel, the title Lord, something like that. Also, we are going to see regarding Daniel that Nebuchadnezzar says to Ruach Elohim Kadishin. You have the spirit of what looks like the holy gods, but really means angels, or the Spirit of God is in you. Another big issue that we're going to talk about is the times. Times, period of times, years. Idan is a term that we do use, in fact, in contemporary Hebrew, a season. Right? You should be familiar with it from some of the Hebrew prayers, the Aramaic prayers that we use. But there's going to be a substantial argument about whether Idan means a week, a month, a season of the year, spring, summer, winter, etc., or a year, or an unspecified period of time. Take your pick. The commentaries are all over the place with regard to that issue. Okay? We're going to start reading, and I'm going to say completely in the English with one or two exceptions. Biblical Aramaic is one of the harder subjects to learn, but if you take a look onto the Hebrew side, you'll see that it's not that strikingly different from Hebrew, and with a little bit of Hebrew knowledge, you can figure it out. So we're going to start last couple of lines of chapter 3. Chapter 3, verse 31, and again the issue is we're ignoring completely the chapter division, which is 13th century Christian origin. There's a very short article I referenced on Chabad.org that talks about this. Even among Christian readers of the Bible and religious Christian readers of the Bible, you see that the chapter division is problematic, and that's a subject for discussion on another day. Here's the letter. King Nebuchadnezzar, chapter 3, verse 31. I'm reading from the Art Scroll edition, largely because it has very nice print. Keep in mind, chapter 2, the king is worried by this vision of the statue he sees, made up of many metals, and chapter 3, where he makes a statue of pure gold, meaning Babylon is going to rule and reign forever, and his kingdom, his bloodline will last. Okay? From King Nebuchadnezzar to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell throughout the earth, may your peace be abundant. It behooves me, wonderful English word. I got to do this. I have to relate the signs and the wonders that the supreme God has performed for me. How great are his signs and how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is for all generations. If you look over with one eye onto the Hebrew side, you'll see familiar terms. It comes up in the words here come up in some of the Zmirot we use on Shabbat as well. Chapter 4, verse number 1. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was tranquil in my house and vigorous in my palace. Shlehavet, I had shalom, and I was ra'anan, which we would take as pleasant, well-watered, is the term that comes out. I was well-fed, happy, strong, enjoying life. Verse number 2, I saw a dream that frightened me, and my thoughts upon my bed and the visions of my head bewildered me. Sounds familiar. This is exactly what we get in chapter 2. I issued a command to bring before me all the sages of Babylonia, so that they would make known to me the interpretation of the dream. Then came the necromancers, the astrologers, the Chaldean stargazers, the demonists. And we've largely brushed aside the distinctions between all of these various magicians and wizards. And completely unlike the dream in chapter 2, I related the dream before them, but they could not make known its interpretation to me. If you remember back to chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar had forgotten the dream, or pretended he had forgotten the dream, and insisted that the wizards and magicians explain it. At last there came before me Daniel, whose name is Belshazzar, after the name of my God, and in whom is the spirit of the holy God. And my translation has here capital H, capital G. Nebuchadnezzar recognizes that the God of Israel is supreme. But there happen to be other gods who help him out, right? I related the dream before him. And he says, Belshazzar, chief of the necromancers, Rav Chartumaya. And there's a spectrum of opinions as to exactly what each of these different levels and titles of magicians are. Necromancing doesn't seem like a very particularly pleasant title to put to a hero of the Jewish Bible. So we're going to call him Chief Wizard or Chief Magician. Since I know that the Spirit of the Holy God is in you, and no secret is hidden from you, this is the vision of the dream that I saw. Tell its interpretation. And here he goes, verse number 7. He starts to relate the dream. Yeah. These were the visions of my head. I was watching, and behold, a tree in the middle of the earth. The height of it was great. The tree is going to very, very obviously be Babylon. But the interesting note is one of the commentaries that is not on Safari, as I've just written it in. It's text number 1. I saw a tree of great height in the midst of the earth. Rav Saadia Gaon is 882 to 942 CE. So he's in the 10th century, right? He's earlier than Rashi. He's born in Cairo, lived in Babylon. Saadia is here in my edition. V'hinei ilan be'eretz Yisrael. Behold, a tree in the land of Israel, the navel of the world. Totally, completely against what everyone else is saying, that this is a tree growing in Eretz Yisrael. And I'm guessing there's stuff we can read into it. And indeed, Malbim and a couple of the others note that Babylon and Eretz Yisrael are close together. Well, they had a different conception of geography, didn't have Google Maps to look at. Nonetheless, let's continue with the dream here. The tree grew and became strong. Its height reached to the heavens. It was visible to the end of the earth. Its foliage, its leaves were beautiful, its fruit plentiful. There was food for everyone on it. Under it the beasts of the field took shade, and the birds of heaven nested in its branches, and all flesh was fed from it. There are a number of different possibilities regarding what each thing refers to. Just looking at Abarbanel very quickly. The branches represent Nebuchadnezzar's relatives, the royal family. The leaves, the army. The shade protects the countrymen. According to Rav Saadia Gaon, the branches are the governors, the mayors of the cities. It goes on and on. The fruit, the population in general. Abarbanel says the fruit refers to Nebuchadnezzar's rule, the fruit of the governmental structure that's represented by the tree. So we've got, a number of different ways of looking at it, but basically the tree is Babylon. The tree is Nebuchadnezzar, you in particular. Your rule, your leadership is like a tree. And everyone is happy with this tree. Even the nations that you have conquered, we are all happy under your rule. Verse number 10. In the visions of my head upon my bed, I was watching, and behold, a holy angel came down from heaven. Right at the end of verse number 10, Ir Vikadish. This is a term that we're going to see again and again in Daniel. Ir means awake, right? Unlike a city, it's Aramaic, or it's Hebrew, mitorer. When I wake up in the morning, I am mitorer. I wake up very, very slowly. But Ir, a wakeful one, a watchful one, Vikadish, and a holy one. This is very much characteristic of Daniel, and we're going to see this in Daniel's dreams as well, where a holy one, an angel. We're going to meet the angel Gabriel, and they're going to talk to Daniel. And here the angel is going to start speaking to Nebuchadnezzar. The angel cried out loudly and said, "Chop down the tree and cut off its branches. Cast down its foliage and scatter its fruit. Let the animals move away from it and the birds from its branches." But that's not the end. Right? Verse number 12. However, leave the major root in the ground. Leave the root, the main part of the root in the ground. We're dealing with the imagery of a tree. If you chop down a tree, it does grow up again from its root. If you've ever had to remove a nasty tree from your garden that you don't want to have there for some reason, you've got to take out all of the roots. Here the root is being left behind. Secure the root with a band of iron and copper. In the plants of the field, and let it be washed by the dew of heaven, and let its lot be with the beasts in the grass of the earth. It should just be a stump of a tree, held down and restrained by a outside force, by metal bands. And pretty obvious where this is going, right? Now we've got the point where we get to verse number 13. They will change its heart. And I'm reading the English from the Art Scroll. And there is a little bit of difference according to how we want to translate this. Text number 2 on the source sheet, from Safaria's translation of English, let his mind be altered from that of a man, and let him be given the mind of a beast, and let 7 seasons pass over him. Right? Notwithstanding that, the literal translation is, they will change his heart, and an animal's heart will be given to him. Who is going to do the acting here? Who is going to make Nebuchadnezzar change his mind and have a different mind? The angels. The angels who have authority over this sort of stuff. The forces that keep a king or anyone else sane. They're going to manipulate the mind of the king, and it's going to be done to him. V'shiva idanin, 7 seasons. This is a hard one. Notwithstanding, it's not massively relevant, but it is going to become very, very important in terms of definitions when we get to the last chapters of Daniel, and he's going to say seasons and periods of time, and we're not really going to figure out exactly what he means. Rashi says right away here on Daniel 4:13, Sheva Shanim, 7 seasons means 7 years. Malbim, right? What's gonna happen here? Let's take a moment and read Malbim because he's significant. This is text number 4. There should be a bright red number 4. His heart will be changed. Nishtaneh levavo. His heart will be changed from a human heart, and he will be given lev chaya, the heart of an animal. To the point where he is not going to be afraid of chaya, of animals out there, because he will believe himself to be an animal exactly like them. Mishtatefi mahem biyachad. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, will be given the heart and mind of an animal, so he can live in the field, in the forest, and not be scared. Right? I don't know what this type of mental illness is like in reality, but I can imagine being afraid of other wild animals. Here he is not afraid of the other wild animals. Here we go. Sheva idanin, 7 seasons. Malbim gives what I think is the most sensible reading here. Because through this particular madness, there will be shiv'a shinuyim. There will be 7 changes. The illness will change, either with a year or with a period of time, until he comes to the very last change, shebo nitrapeh, in which he will be cured. In simple English, Malbim is telling us what Abarbanel is also telling us, that this will be a 7-stage process. Right? It will go 1, 2, 3, 4 will be the bottom, 5, 6, 7, he will come back and be completely healed. Exactly what those stages are, we don't have all of it, but we do have most of it, and most of it can be read in the text clearly. Okay? Chapter 4, verse 14. The matter is by the decree of the angels, and the sentence is by word of the holy ones. Right? Holy ones referring to carried out by the angels, so that all living beings may know that the Supreme One rules over the kingdom of men, giving it to whomever he wishes and appointing the lowest of men over it. Keep in mind that little bit at the very end, Ushval anashim yakim Allah. The lowest of men he will raise up over it. Daniel is in a difficult position in the court of the king of Babylon. He is a Jew. He is a foreigner. He is subject to the king. And we're going to take a look at some text on some stuff on this in a minute or two. But Nebuchadnezzar, remember, is the one who destroyed the temple in Jerusalem. He is the one who laid waste to the city of Jerusalem. He is the one who captured the king of Israel as a prisoner. He is the one who brought Daniel there as a prisoner and put him to work in the court. Right? So Daniel has to tread a very careful line here. He doesn't want to insult the king. He doesn't want to get his anger raised, but he is now at this point in a significant position in the palace of the king. So maybe he can influence and help the oppressed, captive Jewish people here. Verse number 15. This dream I saw, I, King Nebuchadnezzar, and you, Belshazzar, tell its interpretation. Because all the sages of my kingdom are unable to make the interpretation known to me, but you can. Daniel was silent for a while, and his thoughts confounded him. The king exclaimed and says, Belshazzar, let the dream and its interpretation not bewilder you. Don't be afraid to tell me the truth. This is text number 5 on the handout. Daniel was perplexed. Amur Rabbeinu, text number 6. The rabbis tell us in the Talmud that Daniel is here having this complicated discussion. He is talking on the one hand to King Nebuchadnezzar, and on the other hand, he is addressing a prayer to God. Right? When he replies to the king in the second half of verse 16 and says, my Lord King, may this dream be upon your enemies and its interpretation upon your foes. Right? Israel is the enemy of Babylon. So he must be doing this kind of double speak, double entente, right? Intending this as a prayer to God, while also trying to appease and be nice to the king and save his own skin. Verse number 17. The tree that you saw, which grew and became strong, foliage was beautiful, etc., etc. We're going to zip over a little bit. It is you, O king. You are the tree who have grown and become powerful. Your greatness has grown and reached the sky, and your dominion to the end of the earth. And that which the king saw, an angel come down from heaven saying, chop down the tree, destroy it, leave the root behind, band of iron and copper, washed by the dew of heaven. He's repeating it, but he's not repeating all of it. You've got to pay careful attention. He's leaving out a little bit here to not get the king angry with him or with the Jewish people. This is its interpretation. Verse number 21. It is the decree of the Supreme One. God is in charge and has said, this is what is going to befall my Lord the King. They will drive you from mankind. Right? Again, we've got this passive or active decision to make here. We're not parsing the verbs. We're not in a Aramaic grammar class, so we don't need to worry about it. You will be driven away from humankind. You will go to live with animals, and they will feed you with like oxen. There's no mention of an ox in the dream as told by the king, but the shore is an ox. The shore is a powerful animal, and Daniel chooses that one. You do see pictures of Nebuchadnezzar looking more like a wolf, right? That is, of course, obviously a misreading. That's an entirely different set of study that we have done at Shir Chadash, where there's intentional and unintentional misreading of texts through the various Greek and Latin translations, where they've simply made a mistake or they've misread things intentionally. Here he's going to be an ox, and you will be washed with the dew of heaven, until you recognize that the Supreme One rules over the kingdom of men, and he gives it to whomsoever he wishes. Right? If you recall back a few verses, the lowest of men rules over. The nation of Israel, which is today the lowest, will eventually be in charge. Here Daniel has fuzzed the details a little bit, and Midrash and Talmud does indeed critique him for that. Daniel's got to preserve his own skin. Yeah, take a very quick look at text number 7 on the source sheet. 7 seasons, that's the English translation. Shiva Idani, and Rashi gets interesting here. And Rashi is echoing perhaps what Abarbanel and Malbim will be saying. Why 7? 7 seasons, Yesh Lomar Gemul Beit HaMikdash, that the 7 seasons, the 7 years, which Rashi takes that to mean, is payback for destroying the temple in Jerusalem that he destroyed, that took 7 years to build. Right? Nebuchadnezzar is an agent of God, just like all of us. We're not here on our own personal missions. God has something in store for all of us and planned for all of us. And even someone as wicked, as negatively portrayed in the Bible and afterwards as Nebuchadnezzar, he has a purpose. He did what he did. He is being punished for it. He needs to recognize in the course of his punishment what on earth is going on, or rather what in the cosmos is going on. That God is using him as a tool for God's ultimate purpose, and recognize God, which is what he does. Look at note number 9, text number 9. Yeah, that's on verse number 23, Daniel 4:23. As to that which they said in the dream, leave the major roots, your kingdom will remain with you after you recognize that heaven rules. Right? This is Malbim. We're going to read a little bit of it. It's what does it mean the root will be left? This mashal, this whole parable, is not regarding the kingdom of Babylon at all, but regarding you, Nebuchadnezzar, in particular. When is your kingdom going to come back? Mina'et shetagia lidei hakara. When you, O king, come to the point where you will recognize that God rules, God is in charge of absolutely everything, then your mind is going to come back and your kingdom is going to come back. And just like we said a moment ago, Shefal Anashim, the lowest of men, is going to rise over whoever God places him. God makes the lowest of men in the highest position, referring to Israel, the lowest of the kingdoms. Daniel doesn't put this in his interpretation. He's very, very careful. The green section here. Here we get to the absolute crux of the matter. This is the point that I think you need to understand this chapter completely. And this is Malbim quoting Abarbanel, and he will attribute it as well to Abarbanel. The main anger that God has with regard to Nebuchadnezzar is for the image that he made, Shechashav levatel gezerat shamayim al yedei pe'ulato zot, that through making the statue of gold and having everyone bow down and acknowledge it, not worship it as an idol, but acknowledge that this is the future, this was supposed to magically and through mystical means destroy and uproot Gezerat Elyon, what God had predicted and decreed, that the 4 nations will come and go. All right? Chapter 2's picture of the king, seeing this statue representing the not progression but the degression of his kingdom, I think that's a word, that he tried to destroy and uproot by the golden statue. God took this as a direct affront. You cannot challenge what I have said. There is no magic on earth that you can do that will undo what I have decreed. And that's what the tree is about. A human being as a tree, and Daniel is explaining it to him, but pushing aside some of the details so as not to not to make him too angry. Thank God for coffee. Okay, verse number 24. The purpose of Nebuchadnezzar's punishment was to induce him to acknowledge that he could not tamper with God's master plan for the world, as he had attempted previously. Right? That's the whole point of it. I'm just reading that one-line summary out of the Art Scroll here. Nevertheless, O king, Daniel gives some advice. Let my advice be acceptable to you. He is again critiqued in many places for this. Redeem your sin through righteousness. Maybe he should have said nothing and said, let this wicked king go. He made the decision to play along and to go along with this position. Redeem your sin through righteousness, your iniquities through kindness to the poor. Perhaps there will be an extension to your tranquility. Extension as opposed to erasing the decree, right? Yeah. Rashi on Daniel 4:24, this is text number 10 on the source sheet. Perhaps there will be shahut l'shlomecha, shelo timaher hara'ah lavo, that this particular bad decree will not come very quickly. And Rashi is bringing the classic question here. Why did Daniel want to give him advice? And the answer is really quite simple. He saw Jews poor. The remnant of Israel, the exiles, were there knocking on doors, begging, and he says to Nebuchadnezzar, be nice to those Jews. You put them there. You made them exiles. They're poor. They're hungry. Open up your royal households, storehouses, etc., and let them enjoy the handouts and the bounty that you have, and perhaps 12 months will be good. All this befell King Nebuchadnezzar. He did it. Right? So Rashi gives that, and it seems that for 12 months he does indeed continue to give charity, open his storehouses, and we'll see there's a consequence of this as well. All this befell, verse 25. At the end of 12 months, he was walking atop the royal palace of Babylon. Here we have the arrogance exclaimed. King exclaimed and said, is this not the great Babylon which I have built into a royal house with my powerful strength, for glorification and for my splendor? Not the sort of thing he should be saying. Right? He had got the warning. As Rashi tells us, he's managed to hold off the judgment for a while. But he looks around and says, I made myself. I am so great. I am wonderful. Right? He is not being punished, of course, directly for this piece of arrogance, but the misdeeds of the past, right? While the words were still in the king's mouth, a voice fell from heaven. To you, King Nebuchadnezzar, we say, right? Again, the Amrin, we're saying, there are heavenly hosts, there are people, there are beings up there that are in charge of different types of punishments. There is an angel in charge of Babylon, and they're doing it. We say the kingdom has departed from you. We are driving you from humankind. Your dwelling will be with the beasts of the field. They will feed you grass like oxen. Right? Does the Ispakitorin lach yita'amun. They will feed you. The forces of nature. I don't think the picture is that he's going to be like an ox or a cow on a farm. He's going to be fed grass and he's going to eat it. 7 periods of time will pass over you. And then you will recognize that the Supreme One rules over the kingdom of man, and he gives it to whomsoever he wishes. At that precise moment, the decree befell Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven from humankind. He ate grass like an ox. His body was washed by the dew of heaven until his hair grew like eagle's feathers and his nails like birds' talons. That really does not mean that he was changed into a bird or an eagle, right? So we're getting sort of mixed pictures here, right? He eats grass like an ox. His hair grows like feathers, and his nails like a bird. My note to myself here is, wherever I wrote it somewhere, that he was a hairy guy to begin with, right? Some people have more body hair than others. He had a lot of body hair that just grew very long and covered him like eagle's feathers, and his nails grew long like the talons and the nails of a bird, right? At the end of 7 periods of years, I'm reading the translation here, we can take it like Malbim, 7 seasons, we can take it like Rashi, 7 actual years. I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes to heaven, and my senses returned to me. I blessed the Supreme One, and I praised and glorified the eternal God, whose rule is eternal and whose kingship is for all generations. All the inhabitants of earth are reckoned as nothing, and he acts according to his will with the host of heaven and the inhabitants of the earth. There is no one who can stay his hand, no one can stop God from doing anything, or say to him, what have you done? At that time my senses returned to me, and I returned to the glory of my kingdom. My appearance came over me, my appearance came back to me, and my ministers and nobles sought me out. I was reestablished over my kingdom, and additional greatness was given to me. There's a little bit more in the text. Now, here we go. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise, extol, and glorify the King of heaven, whose actions are all in truth and whose paths are justice, and who is able to humble those who walk proudly. Let's take a look at some Malbim here, because he is going to bring in the big topic that I really want to propose with all of this. And that is the unity and continuity of the narrative. What's going on here with King Nebuchadnezzar? He seems to be going back and forward from connecting and acknowledging the God of Israel, and also acknowledging the power of Marduk, Bel, wizardry, and all of those other things that, of course, are negative and contrary to belief in the supreme God. This is text number 12, next to the last one. We're going to take a quick look into it rather than read all of it. In the end of times, after the 6 seasons, he appeared to be an animal. He looked down towards the earth, walked on all fours. I'm quickly translating this because I really want to get into the next and the final text. His mind left him. He became an animal. Then his mind returned, and he started to look up. He stood up on his feet, looked towards heaven. Then his mind returned. He remembered that he was no longer an animal. Then he remembered that he was a man. Then he remembered that he was a king. Only after he acknowledged that God is God, God is in charge, and the reasons for all of this punishment. The next piece in Malbim is a little bit long, but it does explain and sort of put into context what's going on in the theology, if you want to use that sort of term. That what Babylonians and what King Nebuchadnezzar believed in is that there were many gods. And what he learned is the blue overline part here, that shefa, that energy, that good things come me'asiba harishona b'lo emtzai, Right? He's getting into philosophical terminology here. But the Shefa, the divine energy, the power that God gives to everyone to do anything, that comes directly from the prime source, capital P, capital S, from God, without intermediaries. And it is only to the Supreme God who we have an obligation to acknowledge. And not according to how he thought before, that, well, maybe God isn't so concerned about things that are going on here and with us in Babylon, but there are other gods and the stars and angels who look after all of this. Let's take a look at the next one, because I want to read this completely. And it's the very last piece of Malbim on the book of Daniel, chapter 4. And it is quite important. And this is the major issue here. And a lot of the commentaries on this book, including the Jewish ones, including the classical ones, especially the what we would call secular or scholarly, look at this as a book of multiple stories that have been bound together for a specific reason. The scholarly opinion seems to be that this is actually put together in the time of the Hanukkah story, 2nd century BCE. Classical Jewish reading of this says this much earlier, of course, 6th century, around and about the time of the destruction of the temple and the end of the first Jewish Commonwealth. Okay, Malbim text number 13. At that particular point, his mind returned. Also in terms of Malchus, in terms of him being a king. At first, he only got the normal, regular human use of his body back. Right? This is what Malbim has been saying before, that it's stages. There were 7 stages to his descent into this loss of mind, and he reaches the bottom of that and then climbs back out. He knew he was a king again. Then his hadar, his glory, returned. His face returned to that of a normal human face. Right? Someone who is very sad looks different from someone who is happy and in full control. The point in time came when his Sarav and Gedolav, his advisors and princes, they came and they recognized him and brought him back to the palace. V'nosaflo kavod yoter, right? It's a line that we shouldn't ignore. It gets better. He is added to him was kavod yoter, more kavod, more glory than that which he had before, because after all, he has recognized the true God, come through this alive and a better person and a more honored person. Right? Here we go. Green section here. Kfar bi'er hari'ah. Harav Yitzchak Abarbanel. Right? Rabbi Yitzchak Abarbanel, 15th century Spain, Portugal, Spain, Venice. He has already explained this. Ba'asher asa et hatzelem. When Nebuchadnezzar made the statue, this is chapter 3, Shaya kavanato, his intention was levatel bazeh gzerat Hashem yitbarach, to annul the decree of God with regard to the 4 kingdoms that would come and go, and to grab hold of the kingship and rulership of the world for himself for all time. Ne'enash, he is punished. V'husar mamlachuto gam b'chayav. He was given the experience and the punishment where his kingship was removed from him while he was still alive. Why? L'ma'an yakir, so he should recognize shehashem malchuto bakol mashala, that God is king and rules over absolutely everything. B'inyan sheshloshat hasipurim, the 3 stories, chapter 2, 3, and now 4, that are put together in this particular book of Daniel, nishtal shelu echad mechavero, one follows on from the other. This is what we started with. And this is the text that brings it out clearly. Rav Yitzchak Abarbanel, summarized for us by Malbim. If you would like to spend time reading Abarbanel, we can very happily do that. It turns out he is not as difficult to read as he appears to be. We just have to get a nice, clear new edition of the text and also clear some time for it. Al Yedei Chalom Hatzelem, because of, on account of the dream of the statue with 4 parts, he made a statue in the valley of Dura. Right? If you recall, when we were talking about this, this was a specific place of impure power. This was the spiritual power of the dark side present in that particular place to destroy, to annul the decree of God. It is because of this, ne'enash, he is punished. V'gurash mi malchuto, and he is driven out from being a king. Gam b'chayav, also during his lifetime. Right? He isn't killed. God has a purpose for this king. He has to be the most powerful king in the world, taken down more of a peg, more than a peg or two, get his comeuppance, as they say, recognize what's going on, and then come back. And then be in a position of so much power that he is able to make a declaration of all of this to the entire world, or the majority of the world, which is under his control at that point. V'lo ne'akar mimeno hamalchut behechlet. The rulership, the kingship, was not completely taken away from him. Shekvar ya'ad al yedei Yirmiyahu, the prophet Jeremiah has already predicted, right? Jeremiah is a little bit earlier than this time. Sheyavdu hagoyim oto vet beno vet ben beno, that the nations of the world will serve Nebuchadnezzar, his son, and his grandson. It's predicted, it's planned, it's meant to be like this. V'gam shehuchzar lemalchuto, he is also returned to his kingship to make known to people shevach ha'el u'gevurotav, the power of God and his praise. And it is for this reason, katav zot b'michtav, galui l'chol ha'amim. That is why he wrote this as an epistle, as a letter, to be read out to all of the nations. Right? We don't see this letter way of doing things as very much in Hebrew scriptures. It's there in Christian Bible, of course. Various letters to different churches around the world. But here we don't see it. Purim. The Purim story is roughly this sort of time. According to Jewish tradition, Jewish readings, Daniel pops up in the Purim story. So this is all that particular area, and if you recall from the reading of the Megillah, it's Igeret HaPurim Hazot, this Purim letter, right? So it's something of that time that we don't see much, if anywhere else, in the Hebrew Bible. So we end up here with, again, we're still in Malbim, the very last couple of lines. I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and honor the King of heaven. God does everything. He saw that God does. And there is hashgacha. There is divine rulership. There is divine oversight and planning. And that is lefiadin v'hamishpat. That there is justice. There is real justice. And that people who are arrogant, mahalchim bega'ava, those who are arrogant, God can bring down. Because his great arrogance, that he could overthrow God's rule and God's will, that's where he got pushed down. Right? And that's the end of the chapter here. It's interesting to note that there really is a unity of theme, and there is a continuity in the book of Daniel. The story progresses one event, one dream, following another in a very, very logical sequence. Certainly with regard to chapters 1 through 4. And that's the gift of Malbim, summarizing pretty much all that Abarbanel says, and pointing this out, which the other commentaries do not manage to do at all, and in fact tend to go in the opposite direction. I want to say that this is a book of God's holy Torah, that this is something that has to teach us things, that there is a guiding hand behind all of this. I happen to be a believing Jew. I happen to believe that these books are holy and influenced and edited and put together some way, directly or indirectly, from heaven, right, with a capital letter H. And there is an overall message to all of this. The next chapter is going to be chapter 5, which is the Belshazzar's feast and the writing on the wall. I just want to bring in one issue that does come to us from outside of the standard Jewish readings, and that is the issues with regard to dating of who did all of this and when did it happen. We've mentioned this before, and it's not terribly relevant because the message is the message and the story is the story. But there is in the annals of Babylon a particular king with a similar name, but not exactly, Nabonidus, and he lives at a different time. He lives a bit later on, where he does seem to go into complete seclusion in a palace that he has made for himself, to which he admits very few people, and he goes off there even at the time of the Babylonian New Year, which is the most important festival of the year that no king had ever missed before. So there's speculation that there's some element of that in there as well. Nonetheless, I mean, from our particular reading of this, certainly following Malbim, certainly following Abarbanel, which is the way I choose to look at it, and that's, you may choose, of course, to look at these things differently, that this is God saying to King Nebuchadnezzar, you cannot control everything. God is in charge, acknowledge it, get used to it. And he goes through this whole 7 periods, descent into madness, losing his mind completely, and then coming back, being sane, writing about it, telling us all his experience. I mean, it's a very contemporary way of doing things. If you read self-help blogs and self-help books and self-improvement stuff, acknowledging your failure, right? There's always an additional element to all of this, right? There's history, there's insights in it. We're not entirely focused on that in this particular course, but there is always the personal lesson, and this is what we get from Chassidut to a large degree. If you are reading the book of Daniel, it's not an accident that you came to this book, or an accident that I came to this book. I mean, some people asked me to learn it with them a couple of years back, and that's where we started. But the book comes to you, and the lesson in it comes to you, because you and that lesson need to connect. And the lesson here is very, very obvious. Admit your mistakes. Take your punishment. Go down into a difficult period in your life and acknowledge that God has put you here to learn something, to do something, and to climb back out of that through a natural progression of events, right? In the case of the king, he gets a certain illness, he goes down to the bottom of that illness, it gets its worst, and then he comes back up. And then he says, I got more kavod now than I ever had in my entire life. I am a better king, I am a more powerful king than I was. Try and put that into difficult situations and difficult times. I mean, if you want the coronavirus lesson from it in the last minute that we have, there it is. Why are all of us put into these things? Why did we have this illness all around us? Why is there this lockdown when we're sitting at home depressed, watching too much television? We have to come back from that, and we have to learn something from it. The lessons, the messages of all of the books of the Bible, especially the book of Daniel, they're not just historical, they're not just helping us understand periods in our history, they're helping us understand ourselves. And that is ultimately what all of Torah is about. And that is ultimately what learning Torah is all about. Thank you for your time. We're at 59 and a bit minutes, so I got to give it an end point here. If you would like to spend time learning the Abarbanel commentary on this or in anything else, I can go out and buy the book. It is available in a nice edition. I believe it even has vowel points on it. It would be a time-consuming project. Abarbanel is not short, but he seems to be a great deal easier to read than I had imagined from the outset. So that is something that I want to offer. If you would like to let me know, give me a call, email, etc. Have a wonderful day. Get out and enjoy some sunshine and some fresh air. And thank you for your time and your attention. We will be doing this again, same time, same station. And hopefully I can get over my technical glitches here. But that didn't seem to bother the broadcasting. Have a wonderful day, people. Stay well, stay healthy, and be inspired.